About 3 a.m., Barbara wakes up to the sound of rustling coming from outside of her window. She pulled the curtain aside just enough to look out the screen door, and she noticed propped up against the fence was this bike that she didn't recognize. And as she's looking at the bike, she hears more rustling coming from the left, which is closer to Alyssa's room. And as she's got her face pressed up against the screen trying to look, she sees a boy emerge from the bushes from right underneath Alyssa's room. He's got that high school Letterman jacket. He's got his hood pulled up, and he doesn't look over at her. He's just backing up away from Alyssa's room, and he's looking up into Alyssa's room. But all she knew is she's not going to call the cops on some teenage kid that's coming to say hi to Alyssa. Instead, she's going to confront him. And so she quietly gets off of her bed, she walks out of her room to the front of the house, and she quickly walks around to the edge of the porch. So she pokes her head over and she goes, "Can I help you?" And immediately Barbara's like, "Oh, whoa. He is not a teenager. He looks like he's in his 20s, if not 30s. No matter what, he is a lot older than Alyssa." Somewhere in the back of her mind, she's thinking, this doesn't feel right. He's just looking up at her, and he actually starts taking steps towards her to the point where Barbara says, "Stop. Stop where you are." And he does. And he looks up at her and he says, "I'm looking for Alyssa. Is she home?" And so thinking on her feet, she says to him, "Who did you say you're looking for? Lisa?" Without any hesitation, he goes, "No, I'm looking for Alyssa McCarran. She lives here." Barbara went silent for a second because he was right. That was her name, and she certainly was here. But she did not want him coming anywhere near the house. And so Barbara says to the guy, "I need you to stay right there. It's 3 a.m. I don't know you. Give me a minute. I'll be right back." And then she went into Alyssa's room and she shook her foot to wake her up. And she says to Alyssa, "Did you invite a boy here tonight?" And Alyssa's like, "No, what are you talking about?" "Well, there's a boy outside that clearly knows you. He asked for you by name, and he knows you live here, and he's outside right now. Can you please go out there and tell him that coming over unannounced at 3 a.m. is not very polite, and he shouldn't do it again?" Alyssa's confused, and so she leans back and she opens the curtain of her window, and immediately she pulls her head back in, and she says, "Grandma, he asked for me by name? I've never seen him before in my life." Suddenly, everything made sense for Barbara. This was a stranger. This is probably a grown man, and he was probably trying to break into Alyssa's room. And so as she's having this realization, they both hear footsteps out on the front porch. And at this, Barbara goes into full protective grandmother mode, and she tells Alyssa, "Stay in your bed, do not move," and then runs to the front of the house. And now she's standing right on the other side of the door, kind of waiting to see what's going to happen. And this guy is standing on the porch, but obscured. She can't see him because he's on the other side of the door. And it's silent for a second. And as she's standing there just waiting for something to happen, she hears knocking on the door. And it startled her when she heard it, and she yelled out, "There's no Alyssa McCarran here. You have the wrong house. You need to leave or I'm calling the police." And the knocking stops for a second, and he says, "I know Alyssa lives here. Tell her to come outside." He goes back to knocking, and Barbara picks up her phone and she calls 911, and she intentionally talks really loudly into the phone, making it very obvious she is calling the police. And very clearly this guy picked up on what Barbara was doing because the knocking stopped, and she saw him through the little slit of glass next to the door run to the left of the house, back towards the side where his bike was. And so Barbara, while on the phone, runs into the bedroom where she was sleeping, and she looks out the side window, and the last she sees of this guy is riding his bike across the street. And then he stops next to an SUV, and he opens a trunk, and he throws the bike in the trunk, and he gets in the passenger side of the car, and they drive off. Which means whatever he had planned to do with Alyssa, or whatever he was doing this night, he had an accomplice. The police show up a couple minutes later, and at this point, this creep and whoever he was with are long gone, but Barbara still gives her description of the vehicle and description of the night and what happened. And the police told her that over the past couple of weeks, they've gotten very similar reports from other households where there are young girls inside of the house. Apparently, this boy was actually a grown man that would use social media to figure out where kids lived, and then he would dress up like a teenager, and then he would go stalk them. And so whatever Alyssa had listed online, he had been able to deduce that she lived there, and who knows how long he had been looking in the window at her at night. Just know that I really appreciate your support, and until next time, that's going to do it. See ya.